Hello, everyone. No matter where you happen to be around the world, this is Mike Fitz, your resident naturalist with Explore.org, the world's largest live nature cam network. And welcome to this latest play-by-play broadcast of the bear and salmon activity that we see at Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. This is brought to you by Explore.org and the U.S. National Park Service. And joining me today to help talk about the bear and salmon activity that we see at Brooks River is Ranger Naomi Voke from Katmai National Park. Naomi, great to speak with you once again, and it looks like you have a great day up there at Brooks River.
Yeah, no, it's I'm inside in my office right now, but it's beautiful here, and you know, an incredible day, and hoping we get to see some bear activity.
Yeah, I think there's a ton to talk about today. You know, just browsing the webcams before the broadcast. I always like to tune in early to see what's going on at the river. We have several different views at our disposal today. Three, actually, to be more specific. We'll have the Brooks Falls camera. We'll have a camera downstream near the river mouth where we can see bears and, of course, lots of salmon. And then we're going to try to incorporate a different camera into our play-by-play broadcast today. This is a look under. This is a camera attached to the bridge at the mouth of Brooks River. So we'll get an underwater view and a salmon's perspective on the river. And I'm excited to talk about the fish that we see on the underwater camera. That's one that we haven't brought into these broadcasts yet. We have a couple of different camera operators that are moving a couple of the other cameras, like the Falls cam, for instance, and the River Watch camera, to give us an idea of what's going on. And they're going to be sending me messages from time to time telling me what we're looking at overall. And this is right now just a look at the River Watch camera with its mounds of salmon in the water. Before we get started in talking about the salmon and the bears more specifically, let me take you on a quick tour in case you're not familiar with the Brooks River itself. And I'll show you just where we are talking about. This is Katmai National Park, about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska. And Brooks River is located in the west central portion of the park. The river is about 1.5 miles long, and it's bisected by Brooks Falls. And there are several webcams streaming live footage from Brooks River. The signal from those webcams is sent wirelessly to 2 radio repeaters on the summit of Dumpling Mountain, and then those repeaters send the signal wirelessly to the small town of King Salmon, about 30 miles away. Again, on today's broadcast, we'll be looking at the Brooks Falls camera on the left side of the screen. We'll be looking at the River Watch camera towards the river mouth and the underwater camera. So that'll give us plenty of opportunities to talk about different things on the broadcast. And Naomi, you've had the opportunity to walk back and forth across the river today, and you were telling me just right before the broadcast how red the salmon have become over the past week or so.
Yeah, they become very red. Even a week ago, you would see a mixture of dark colored salmon and red salmon, but now most of the salmon in the river are red, and some are really bright red, and you can see the transformation of the jaw on the males, and not as many salmon, but they're very red in their spawning colors.
This is just a fantastic look at the fish that are waiting to move upstream to spawn. There's not spawning activity, I should say, in this area of Brooks River when the level of Naknek Lake drops in fall and winter due to freeze up on the glaciers and snow falling on the mountains instead of rain. Then a lot of this area down here is exposed in the winter to air. And if salmon eggs are exposed to freezing temperatures, then they're not going to survive. So the salmon are able to intuit that through a combination of genes and other instincts. So most of these fish will move upstream to spawn, coming up very shortly over the next month and a half or so. And there's enough salmon still moving upstream, though, Naomi, to give us an opportunity to look at some very big bears. Fish is still fishing up at Brooks Falls. Right now we're looking at two very large adult males, fully mature adult males. The bear on the far side of the river in this view right now with the floppy right ear is number 480 Otis. And then the one standing in front of him with that very pear-shaped body is the one we call number 32, and his nickname is Chunk.
So, Mike, I'm going to warn you that I'm having difficulty with both video and audio today. So, I have to log in and out a lot, and I'm currently watching the cams as our viewers are. So, just a little warning here. But that is the classic Chunk getting to be full body, that light bulb shape, and Otis in his office. It's makes one happy to see those two.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, Naomi, I understand you're experiencing some audio and Wi-Fi issues up on your end of things. Neither Naomi and I are in the same location. I'm actually on the East Coast right now, looking at the webcam footage, and she's inside a building at Brooks River where she can get access to Wi-Fi. So we'll try to work through those issues going forward here, and hopefully get Naomi back with some better audio in the time being. But yeah, these two bears right now are just really, really big, looking really, really healthy for this time of the year. Chunk is one of the larger adult males that we typically see at Brooks River. And again, he's sort of like the darker bear that we're seeing in the center of the screen right now. He's an interesting bear to follow because he's very large, and if he wants to assert himself, he certainly can, and assert himself in a way that would provide him with opportunities to displace other bears, gain access to preferred fishing spots. But he also seems to show a fairly high tolerance for a lot of the bears. Even as a big guy, we'll see him partaking in a little bit of friendly activity, a little bit of play. And so he doesn't show the tendencies of like this hyper dominance that we see with a lot of other large males of his size and age. Now Otis is much older than 32. So Chunk here, he was born in 2006, I believe, if not 2005. And Otis was already well into his adult years by then. So Otis is one of the older adult males that we have at Brooks River. He's certainly in his mid-20s, at least right now. And he, due to his age and physical abilities, even though he's fair and looking like he's healthy this year with a lot of fat reserves, he doesn't seem to have the physical ability to compete with a lot of those comparably large adult males. So we see Otis using the river in a different manner. We see him waiting more patiently for fishing spots instead of trying to actively displace other bears. So a couple of looks right here at some of our large adult males at Brooks River. And we'll see these bears using these same areas through October. So you might be able to tune into the webcams every day going forward here as the bears enter their hyperphagia season, their season of eating as much as possible when they don't feel full. And that's a preparation for them to continue to get fat to survive winter hibernation.
Mike, I'm back with you again for now, so fingers crossed.
Now I'm going to transition downstream here. Of course, when we look, okay. Yeah, we'll work with it as best we can, Naomi. I'm glad you're back. You know, I just introduced Chunk and Otis to everybody, and now I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about our salmon. We're looking at the River Watch camera right now at the mouth of Brooks River, and there is one bear kind of hiding in the grass right there, just off to the right-hand side of the screen. But underneath the water, I think today is really where the action is with the that we're seeing. And this is just a tremendous view of a female sockeye salmon. She's been hovering in this area for much of the day, and we've seen a little bit of her fanning the gravel with her tail. And I'm kind of wondering if she's chosen this spot actually as her nesting site, which would be kind of a surprise. We don't see a lot of that nest building and spawning activity near the bridge, but the gravel near the bridge has changed quite a bit since last year, with some trails washing out and things like that. So maybe it's a better spawning area than in the past. And Naomi, have you been seeing a lot of spawning activity down at the mouth of Brooks River, or just still more bears staging in this area? Or excuse me, salmon staging in this area?
Mostly salmon staging in the area. I mean, wouldn't it be lovely if we had salmon spawn in front of the camera? That would be a big bonus.
It would be. And you mentioned earlier today that you were looking down from above at this camera, and it actually has been twisted by a curious bear. The bolts on that were pretty tight, but you know, bears are very strong animals, so thankfully it didn't like rip it off of its mounting, but it ended up twisting it, and now the camera view is actually looking perpendicular to the river current. Before it was looking downstream. Now we're looking across the river, basically in a northerly direction. So this is a female sockeye that we're watching right now, and you can tell a female sockeye from males because females don't have an exaggerated hump on their back. The coloration is going to be the same in their spawning colors, still bright red backs, greenish heads. But males are going to have much more exaggerated hooked jaws, and then also a much more exaggerated hump on their back. And there was a male hanging out with her earlier. Maybe that one is just hanging out of sight right now.
But most of the salmon down there on the lower river are staging. You can see them lined up in that shot we had before, waiting.
It looks like we lost Naomi again. We'll try to get her back in just a little bit. Oh, there you are.
Oh, you got me again?
Just barely. We'll see what we can do.
Well, Mike, you know what? I'm going to bow out, so you can give our viewers a really good.
I appreciate everyone's patience.
I'm going to bow out for the viewers.
All right, I'll do my best. I appreciate it, all of our viewers being patient with our technical issues. We're juggling a lot of things at the same time. Naomi and I don't have a producer really handling this, so I'm logged into an interface and toggling in between different cameras. So it can be difficult to troubleshoot things when they do go wrong. However, I hate Naomi's time trying to join us this evening, and we'll get her back for some future broadcasts, I'm sure. So yeah, we'll look at the underwater camera from time to time because there's definitely a lot of activity happening on here, and I want to try to point out some of the silver or coho salmon that we're seeing on the underwater as well. With bear activity at this time of the year, it's been spread out to different places along the river throughout the month of August. And again, this is still somewhat of a surprise to me, given the fact that when I came to know Brooks River, I didn't expect to see bears in August. And a longtime staff who worked there before me would say, yeah, August is kind of a dead time for bear activity. But with the very, very large runs of salmon that we've seen in the river system the past few years, bears are really starting to use the falls area and the river in August in greater numbers. And here's an example of a well-fed bear being able to, express some more playful behaviors. It seems like bears are very curious about strange and novel things in their environment. And this one just had picked up a log or a branch and was playing with it in the water. The water seems to be a very easy place for them to manipulate objects, so we often see them doing that. And now the bear is undertaking an extensive dive, looking for salmon, anything that can't swim away. And this is another thing that we're seeing more bears doing this year than in the past. And in the past, it was kind of uncommon to see bears diving for fish. So it could be the fact that the bears, some of these bears that are diving are doing it because they're hungrier and willing to work just that extra bit harder to search for salmon. Maybe there's another object on the bottom of the river that has caught this bear's attention right here. We'll see if it comes up with a salmon. It seems to be working hard. But diving for bears isn't something that they seem to be able to do easily. They have a lot of body fat at this time of the year, so they're very buoyant. It's easy for them to swim overall. Oh, maybe it was just going down there to try to get its play branch. So maybe not seeking out a fish, but another source of enrichment. And this is fun to watch. You can see that bears enjoy playing with different things. They enjoy wrestling with one another and manipulating objects in different ways. They don't have opposable thumbs like us, so they have a bit more difficulty manipulating things. But one way they investigate things, of course, is with their mouth, sort of like how a small child will. And that's why it's important to make sure that we're keeping at Brooks River, especially or anywhere actually in bear country, that we're keeping objects that would be of interest to bears away from them, not really giving them that opportunity to explore things with their claws and their teeth, because they can be destructive in their own way when they investigate human-made objects. So this is a young bear who's just expressing some playful behavior. Up at the falls, though, we have mostly older bears right now that are taking their efforts to fish a bit more seriously and practicing that. This is a young adult bear. He looks to me like this could be number 812, and he was born in 2015, if I remember correctly. So just reaching adult age right now, but growing quite rapidly. He's kind of a big guy for his age. And again, if I have that ID right, sometimes on my camera, my view is a bit more pixelated than what you are seeing at home. But I'm fairly confident that this is 812 just from what I can see on my screen here. He's a bear that's learning to fish in the jacuzzi, getting very good at it. He's a bear also that can fish the lip of the waterfall. So he has a couple of different options. If there's a bear that is more, dominant, and that bear is in the jacuzzi, then he has a different place to take his fishing skills and try to make a living. The jacuzzi is certainly a place that takes skill to fish. The older bears, like Otis, for example, 747, Chunk, those skilled bears, they really do make fishing the jacuzzi or look easy. But it's certainly a learned skill. And now we have a very big bear, one of our larger bears moving into the jacuzzi right now. This looks like it could be Chunk trying a different spot than he was before. Earlier in the broadcast, he was near those boulders on the far side of the waterfall. Now it looks like he's moving into the jacuzzi to try his skills there. And you can see how easily that other bear, 812, moved out of the way. That's how most interactions between bears happen to play out. The subordinate bear, the smaller bear, the less dominant bear realizes that it's just not worth trying to challenge these larger bears. It's actually better for them just to kind of yield their spot and get out of the way and save some skin, literally save some skin, and be healthy to fight another day. And actually, now that I'm looking at this bear, this looks like this could be instead of Chunk, number 747. I think Chunk, we got a glimpse of him maybe sitting on the far side of the waterfall. 747 is a giant bear. He's probably the most massive bear on the river right now, a very large bodied bear. it's really a privilege to watch him just because he is so big. Last year, he was estimated to weigh around 1,400 pounds. So one of the largest brown bears on earth, probably sitting in front of us in the jacuzzi right now. (747), like Otis, is a very patient angler. We'll see him sit for long periods of time in the jacuzzi. He'll also prefer to stand near the boulders on the far side of the falls. We don't see him really going to the lip, so that doesn't seem to be a place that he prefers. But the jacuzzi is one of the spots that he's found a lot of success over the years. And if he gets out of the water and we get a better look at him, you'll see just how successful he typically is. And over the course of the summer, bears are gaining several hundred pounds for these adult males at least. They can gain several hundred pounds of body mass before they go into their den to hibernate. Smaller bears, though, like the one that we can still take a look at here downriver, they may grow proportionally more than those large adult males. Our diving bear here down near the mouth of Brooks River is a juvenile bear, so quite fully adult aged, and I'm just looking at its overall size when it's in the water like this. It can be difficult to tell just how big they are, but when you're looking at juvenile bears, often you can take a look at, they have larger ears in proportion to their bodies. Their heads look bigger in proportion to their bodies, and they can be lanky, long-legged, sort of like a teenager going through growth spurts. They're not, always, their body parts always aren't in proportion to one another. But from, let's say, early summer to late summer and fall, they can actually grow proportionally more than a bear like 747 or Otis. These younger bears can double their body weight from early summer to fall. And searching through the river, like this one has been doing, can be very lucrative. A lot of the salmon are still quite fresh. Some of them just happen to die, during the migration process, even though they may still contain a lot of energy within their bodies. So for a bear like this, it could easily meet its energy needs by eating just one salmon per day, and then everything after that is really just pure energetic. It can devote that body mass, that energy to its body mass. And growing taller, longer in its skeletal frame, and then also putting on the fat reserves that it needs to survive winter. This bear right now has a beautiful fur coat on it, light tipped fur, grizzle tipped fur. That's one thing that is characteristic of a lot of brown and grizzly bears. Sometimes people will ask, well, what's in a brown and a grizzly bear? And really, it just comes down to where you happen to live on the continent and what you prefer to call them. To be honest with you, both brown and grizzly bears are the same species. They both can have grizzled tipped fur, so light tipped fur, like this one is showing right here. Generally speaking, though, brown bear is a term that's used more often to describe bears that have access to quote-unquote marine food resources, things like salmon, for instance. So we call our bears here in Katmai brown bears as opposed to grizzly bears. And this bear you can tell by the, kind of the way that it's eating, that it's somewhat relaxed and comfortable in this habitat right now. If there are other bears around that it felt uncomfortable with or threatened by or worried that it might steal a salmon, then we probably would have seen this young bear walk into the grass to eat its fish in a more secluded in a more secluded spot. But right now, sitting on the edge of the river like this indicates, to me at least, that this bear is feeling fairly comfortable in its surroundings at the moment. Up at Brooks Falls, if a bear like this caught a fish, depending on how hungry the other adult bears are and the vibe it sort of gets from bears, It's often quite likely that we'll see these younger bears, if they catch a fish, depart the falls area if they're worried about having their fish stolen. And we'll head back upriver here, I think, in a few moments to take a look at the activity falls. I want to try going down to our underwater camera here just for another moment. We had seen, many fish swimming in this area right now, but there's a portion of the gravel in the lower left portion of the screen that is a little bit lighter in coloration, doesn't have like a brownish hue to it, and that's where that female salmon had been digging. So hopefully we'll get a better look at her later on in the broadcast and the salmon activity on this underwater camera. Just that, again, a fantastic view of the river from a salmon's view. Back up in the falls, our camera operator is going to take a look downstream. The falls camera is mounted to a wildlife viewing platform. And if you go to Brooks River, you'll be able to stand on that wildlife viewing platform to watch bears. And there's likely people on the platform right now enjoying this same scene. But when you're watching the webcams on Explore.org, you actually have the opportunity to watch these bears not just for a few hours, but over days and seasons and years. So we really have a great opportunity through the webcams to get to know these bears on a fairly high level. And our experience through the webcams isn't nearly as ephemeral as what you might experience if you were going to Brooks River and watching bears just for a few hours. A couple of our big guys still in the far pool of Brooks Falls here. This is, again, number 480 Otis and number 32 Chunk on the far side, hiding in the shadow there. They've switched positions since the beginning of our broadcast. We saw Chunk where Otis was standing earlier. That may have happened just because 747 came into the area. He was the bear fishing in the jacuzzi, a more dominant bear than these other two. And that may have just shuffled the deck a little bit. So they, when they reshuffled, they settled it into these different positions respectively. We're about halfway through our play-by-play broadcast this evening, and if you're just tuning in, I'd like to welcome you to Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm the resident naturalist with Explore.org. And during the play-by-play, I talk about basically the bear and salmon activity as I see it on the webcams at Brooks River. And this afternoon, we have several bears using Brooks Falls. For me, one of the main attractions, during this broadcast happens to be the salmon activity that we can look at on the underwater camera right now. And we're looking at two adult male sockeye salmon right now. And actually, that's a bit of a dominance display between those two fish. It was hard to tell because it happened so quickly. They moved out of the screen quickly. But when two adult male sockeye salmon swim parallel to one another broadside like that, that's one salmon trying to displace another salmon, and they're still at it right there. One of those male sockeye salmon has a little bit of a nick at the top of its back, right in front of its dorsal fin. So look for that. That might be an indicator of its identity. We've been seeing, or at least that male, hovering in this vicinity for much of the day. Lots of female salmon swimming through this area. Bears will swim through this area too. Sockeye salmon, though, are really undergoing what is the most important fight of their lives right now. We talk about the competition with the bears quite frequently. At the waterfall, for instance, when they're competing for fishing spots. But these fish right now are fighting to reproduce. They're fighting. The females are fighting for the most productive spawning sites, or the best spawning sites. And there's a female salmon just drifting downstream in front of our camera here. She seems to maybe own that little nesting site there where we saw her digging earlier. And then males will compete for access to those females and protect their access to females. And right now that male is pairing up next to that female. And if this is a nesting site for them, and we'll have to see how long they stick around and how extensive the female's digging activity is here to really know that. If they do, stick around for a while, we'll probably see the male defending, his access to that female from other males frequently. So it's sheer luck that a bear twisted the camera in this direction, and now we're looking more perpendicular to the stream than directly downstream, but giving us just an awesome view of these two fish here. These fish have undergone a tremendous transition since they re-entered freshwater. Sockeye salmon are born in freshwater. They go to the sea to grow large over 2 to 3 years after spending 1 to 2 years in freshwater. And then they come back into freshwater to spawn and die. So these fish have a limited lifespan. They can only survive a short period of time coming up in freshwater here. So all of these fish will be essentially dead by, mid to late October. But they've transitioned rapidly into these glorious looking green-headed and redback fish. And in the background there, it's hard to see swimming out of view, but it looked like there was a silver or coho salmon swimming there. They have not transitioned into their spawning colors yet. But you might be able to see 1 or 2 of those swimming near the camera from time to time. They will have spots on their back, and they'll be larger overall proportionally than the sockeye salmon. We'll come back down here when our salmon tend to give us a better view and come back into view a little bit later on. But our young bear is scavenging more fish just upstream of the underwater camera's location. And it could be a little bit of a trick of the light right now, but it looks to be that this salmon has very pale flesh. And that's an indication that it has been in fresh water for a long time. When you buy a salmon fillet from a store, and please do buy Bristol Bay sustainable sockeye salmon. It is one of the few really last great sustainable fisheries on Earth. But when you buy that salmon in a store and you look at that bright pink fillet, that salmon generally was taken right before it re-entered fresh water. So its fat content, the pigments are all still there. It's a good tasting fish, a fatty, fleshed fish. But as they run upstream, their energy stores start to dissipate quite rapidly. And those pigments are actually transferred from the salmon's flesh into its bloodstream and then to its skin and to the eggs if you're a female. And the net result of that is that who spawned or are in the process of spawning actually have very pale colored flesh. So when bears are eating these fish after they've spawned, those fish, the flesh really looks nothing like the flesh could have that the salmon possessed when it first freshwater. Easy pickings for a lot of bears in the lower Brooks River right now, looking for anything that really just can't swim away. And that's a fishing strategy that's going to continue to increase in reward going forward here. The peak of the salmon spawning activity in Brooks River isn't until September. So these bears still have plenty of time to fatten up on all of the dead and dying salmon that will accumulate in the lower river after they're done spawning upstream. Back at the falls, still several large adult males fishing at the waterfall, and then one on the island coming upstream right now. Bears are always looking for different opportunities, different places. And it's not uncommon to see them shuffling positions. bears are, they're masters of what I like to call energy economics. And I think the contrast in the activity that we see at the falls versus what we see downriver offers a good lesson in that. Bears at the falls are patient and waiting for salmon to come to them. Even though later in late summer and fall, the catch rate can be greater downstream, where we have this younger bear, again, still scavenging fish. So after those fish have spawned and died, their calorie value overall is fairly low. It's probably about half of what it was compared to when salmon first entered fresh water. But up at the falls, the bears are waiting for some of those fresher fish to look for their right places, those fish that are looking for their right place to spawn. And some of these fish that are latecomers into like the small run of coho salmon that we see entering the river right now, give bears fishing the falls the opportunity to catch some large and very fresh fish straight from the ocean. The salmon, the silver salmon, is another name for them. Or they average larger than the sockeye salmon, maybe 8 to 12 pounds, sometimes more. And when they're coming straight from the sea, they're getting they can provide bears with perhaps this 8,000 calories, 9,000 calories or more, depending on just how big and how fresh they are. So the bears at the falls are playing a numbers game. They're sitting there. They're not expending any energy sitting in the water. They're very large bodied, so the water doesn't really seem to bother them all that much. While downstream, a bear maybe have to work a little bit harder searching for salmon. They can't swim away instead of waiting for salmon to come to them. But you can perhaps find dead fish more frequently, so your catch rate, in effect, will be higher. We'll head back up to the falls here for just a moment, because there is a bear on the lip of the waterfall. Not all bears will fish the lip of the falls, but several will many have learned to do that. Not all of them learn it from their mother. There are mother bears that will take their cubs to the falls, but many mother bears avoid the falls area. Or if they do come to the falls, not all of them will fish the lip, hang downstream, for instance, near that island where we saw this bear walking earlier. And I was hoping that this bear would come to the lip and we could get a look at how he does it, because this is one bear that will fish the lip of the waterfall. You could see he had a prominent scar on his right hip. So this is number 821. That's a really distinctive characteristic that you can look for when you're trying to identify this bear. But maybe since he didn't see any salmon jumping, he decided to look upstream, and walking upstream along the riverbank can be reward many bears too. Salmon, as they're done spawning and they begin to die, they'll drift downstream and they'll get caught in the eddies in branches that are hanging low in the water on the riverbank. (747) right now, just catching a fish in the jacuzzi. So he seems to be the first of the large adult males that we've seen during the broadcast catching a salmon. Sometimes 747 will eat his fish right in the jacuzzi, but often he seems to prefer moving out of that spot to eat his salmon and lay down. It's hard to tell at this distance, if that was a silver salmon or a sockeye salmon. Again, both of them can be still trying to transition through the falls area. The sockeye migration period is essentially over right now, so very few of them are going to try jumping the falls. If we see any salmon jumping the falls over the next month or so, most of them are probably going to be those coho salmon, especially if they're silvery in coloration. Otis in the background there shuffling his position, perhaps in response to the close proximity of number 32, who's tucked up in the far corner of the fall. Meanwhile, 747 continues to eat his catch. We were seeing 747 really being selective with the parts of the fish that he was eating earlier in the run. During the migration period, when we had several 100,000 salmon moving through Brooks River, 747 was catching so many fish that he didn't have to eat the whole fish. He could just select the fattiest parts of the fish. But right now, with the catch rate going down as the sockeye migration has finished, he is more likely to eat the whole fish, and where I think we're seeing a good example of that right now, really taking his time with that salmon, and he's likely to not leave much leftovers for any scavengers in the vicinity. "747 has a very blocky muzzle. That's one way that I identify him, other than just being a giant bear. He's very dark in the fall, though. So some of those other characteristics that you might, or physical characteristics and features that you might look at earlier in the summer, like ragged fur and shed patches that he had, are covered up with the new glossy coat of fur that he's grown in since then. Our bear activity during the broadcast over the last 40 minutes or so has been fairly consistent. Really just one bear that has most of the lower river to his or herself, diving and scavenging salmon. The bears up at the falls waiting for fish to come to them. It's fun. Bears dive like this one. Again, it's not a technique that we see very often. We're seeing a lot more of it this year. So it just seems like there are more bears, a few individuals in particular, that seem to be partaking in diving. But sometimes it seems like they have a hard time, learning how to get their behind down in the water. It's just so buoyant with so much body fat that it just kind of pops up like a buoy. For more than, well, perhaps 3 decades at Brooks River, up until around the year 2000 or so, or 1999, there was a bear nicknamed Diver who became legendary at the river as a very large bear, like 747, who we were talking about earlier. And he got his nickname because he would dive just like this. So it can be a very lucrative fishing strategy. It gives you access to salmon that not all bears are willing to take the effort to get to. So perhaps we're looking at, the making of a Diver 2.0 right here. One of the questions that was submitted through our BearCam question form in advance, and you can find that question form or link to it by looking at the featured comment at the bottom of the page. One of the questions submitted to that earlier was from Susan, and she was wondering about a bear's intelligence and problem-solving skills. Can you, just asking in general, can I speak to that? And, when we see bears diving, for instance, it demonstrates that many of these bears are able to learn different fishing techniques by putting two and two together. Again, diving is not a technique that a lot of other bears do. So it's something that bears sort of intuit and reason out in their own way. Up at the falls, when we talk about problem-solving ability, bears adapt to the presence of other bears all of the time. Sometimes we see them sort of innovate new fishing styles. things that we had never seen before. But one of the ways that they have a great ability to adapt and solve problems is just to adapt to the presence of other bears, depending on their level of dominance in the hierarchy. 747 right now, since we don't have a comparably sized adult male at the river who's also aggressive to display 747, he's the most dominant bear that we've seen at the river over the past 2 weeks or so at least. So he can go pretty much anywhere he wants, but other bears really have to pay attention to where he's going. And that may displace them from some of those preferred fishing spots. So for example, if Otis, we saw him just downstream a little bit ago. He was fishing near the rocks and in the far pool, but now he's displaced from those areas by the presence of Chunk and the presence of 747 in that area. So he's gets just adapt and problem solve in his own way, his turn, and that's one of his hallmarks, as being a very patient bear overall. And a good look at a bear right now on the lip of the waterfall. This is number 812. Young adult male, growing a lot, growing very rapidly, pretty big bear for his age, has a lot of body mass on him, so certainly not lean and lanky like you can sometimes see in young adults, but doing quite well for himself. He's a bear actually that was introduced to Brooks Falls by his mother. We know that for sure. He was raised in this area by bear 402, and she's a mother bear that will take even spring cubs to the falls, and she'll fish the lip of the waterfall right where 812 is right now. So he observed his mother doing that, and now he's putting those skills and knowledge of fishing the lip of the waterfall to his own advantage. Not many salmon jumping the falls today, so it looks like 812 is maybe losing patience for that spot. Maybe we'll get an opportunity to see where he goes from here. So fish in the jacuzzi. There is also another bear in there, though. And now these two bears coming together in the jacuzzi, but not in a manner that would suggest at all that they are competing over that fishing spot. This is a very friendly encounter between these two bears. Both the darker bear, we kind of lost track of where number 821 went, but if that is 821, he and 812, if that's not confusing to you, are on fairly friendly terms. And yeah, that is 821 there walking downstream with the scar on his hip. So these bears are familiar with one another. They recognize one another. Bears recognize each other not only across days, but also across seasons and years. And it really does pay to know who the more tolerant bears are, the quote unquote friendlier bears. So you can have access to the areas near them if you want, for instance, or if you just want to partake in a good wrestling match. And it looks like the darker bear, 821 here, precipitated a little bit of this play fight here by walking up to 812 in a friendly manner, head up, sort of ears forward. Sometimes dominant bears, or often dominant bears, will use those same body postures to approach bears that they want place from food resources. But bears are able to read the body language of other bears very well, just like we can read the body language of people and understand, their mood, even though they're not vocalizing it. And now both of these bears sharing the jacuzzi. Right in front of those bears, there's a very deep drop off in that water, so they can't go much farther in there without really having to stand up. And you can actually see the darker bear, number 821, in the foreground here, having a harder time holding his ground against the force of the water. the farther you get into the jacuzzi, the more difficult that becomes. And that's why I think why we see most of the bears fishing the jacuzzi sit just where 812 is. Now on the far side, another type of interaction going on is friendly. And you can see Otis, the lighter brown bear, giving a bit of a growl and some yawning towards that that bear that has approached him. And I think that's 747 that's up in base there on the far side. Chunk has moved downstream to avoid 747. Chunk has had many encounters with 747, so he is not likely at all to try to hold his ground. He's just going to get out of the way a sufficient distance. And that's a lesson for really everybody who's watching at home. If you see a brown bear approaching from a distance, or any bear really, often the best thing to do is just to give it space. And if you can do that without disturbing the animal, then that's often the best course of action to avoid a close encounter where you would have to interact with it and try to read its body language very closely. Otis seems to understand that 747 will get in his face a little bit, but not attack him. Otis is again, an older bear. He has a reputation amongst the other bears at the river. 747 seems to understand that Otis isn't likely to challenge him, but 747 also often does seem to want to remind these other bears like Chunk and Otis to keep your distance and to stay away from my fishing spots. Chunk now deciding, again, he's in the upper right corner, deciding maybe if it's worth it to move to a different spot. If he comes closer to the jacuzzi, which is one of those places where he'll frequently fish, we're likely to see the two bears closer to our side of the webcam move out of the way. And again, that would be just a classic example of how bears more likely to avoid confrontation than partake in a physical battle. H21 now moving to the lip of the falls. You can see that very prominent scar that he has on his hip. So that's a distinctive feature. One of the other behavioral cues that you can look for when you're trying to identify him is that he sits down on the waterfall. There's not many bears that will do that. He seems to, like that tripod position, maybe perhaps gives him more stability on the lip. And I thought we might have a bit of our deck of fishing positions reshuffle as 747 and Chunk move around, but they're still kind of holding steady in those respective spots. 747 now moving away from Otis on that far side. Unless a bear is competing over a specific fishing spot or, an animal carcass or something like that, when you're two bears interacting at the waterfall, it's the more dominant bear that's going to walk away. Again, unless it's over a fishing spot and it's displacing a bear from a fishing spot. So when a bear turns its back on another bear, walks away in those dominant interactions, that's an indication that who the quote unquote winner is. It's the bear that turns his back and walks away typically. Otis, again, against the far wall over there, looking to move back into that far pool, 747 giving him just enough space to do that. Chunk, meanwhile, has been displaced from that far due to the presence of 747. So he's going to be downstream here up in the upper right, just hanging out, looking for an opportunity to move back in. Again, all of these bears are here because they're looking to catch salmon. The fresher the salmon, the better. We'll go back downstream. We have just a few minutes left in our broadcast here this evening. But a good look at a pair of sockeye salmon, a male and a female. The male just moved off of the screen. Another female sockeye just kind of drifting through that area. If that male moves forward just a little bit, we'll see that he was one of the salmon that we were looking at earlier in the broadcast, has a little bit of a nick on his hump right in front of his dorsal fin. This female should remain somewhat identifiable going forward if she sticks into this spot to dig her nest here because of that bit of a mark on her tail. By the end of the time that she is done spawning, her tail will be worn to a nub. It'll be just basically frayed pieces of cartilage. So she really is sacrificing her body in order to reproduce. And all of these fish will die after spawning. So they have a limited time to survive here in Brooks River. But they endure so much, so many trials during their lives. It's really amazing to see them come back and be successful and have the endurance to migrate upstream and to spawn. Once they re-enter fresh water, they are not eating anything at all. Their digestive tract basically atrophies. So even if there were food for them to eat in fresh water, they wouldn't really have that capacity right now to feed. And by the time a female salmon is done, she really has nothing left to expend. Looked like maybe a really big rainbow trout came into view there just for a second, very spotted. That's one of the other fish species that you can look for on the underwater camera. Look for rainbow trout. Look for long-nosed suckers. You might be able to see some smaller fish, sticklebacks, in this view as well. A lot of fish moving around right now that indicates to me that maybe there's a bear upstream that could be swimming back and forth. Really easy to tell the difference now between the male and the female sockeye salmon. Again, the male kind of on the downstream side of the female with those that more exaggerated hook jaws, the larger shoulder hump. Females have to devote a lot of body energy to their eggs, and the eggs before they spawn can constitute as much as 20% of the female's body mass. Males get that big exaggerated hump, perhaps because it makes it harder for other males to bite them. Those big hook jaws, again, aren't for feeding, they're for fighting. They're really for fighting other salmon for access to a female's nesting site so she can fertilize those eggs. And right before we end the broadcast here, I'll try to get to one more question that I had in my queue, and that one actually comes in from Ratna, who was asking about salmon. She was watching the salmon on the camera earlier today, and she was wondering, do male salmons mate with many females at one time, and are salmons territorial? And so I'll get to the second part of that question first. Salmon are certainly territorial around their nesting sites. Females will defend their nesting sites from other females. Because if you come in and you have a good nesting site, you don't want another female trying to dig her nest in the same place. So females will chase other females away from her chosen nesting site, and then males will chase other males away from females. And when they lay their eggs, when that happens, the females will release her eggs into the depression that she's dug with her tail, and the male will release his his sperm simultaneously. So fertilization happens almost instantaneously in the water. The salmon eggs become permeable to water for just and swell with water for a short period of time. So the sperm needs to contact the eggs, fairly shortly after the female releases them. So male and females will release their eggs and milk about at the same time. Beautiful animals downstream here. And actually, I don't think that's a bear in the background there. I think that is maybe a person walking through the water. Fishing is permitted in Brooks River. You have to remain 50 yards from any bear, and you can't have your line in the water when a bear is within 50 yards of you. So if you get surprised, you must immediately remove your line from the water to make sure that bears don't have the opportunity to associate us with any fish. And so there could be some employees there or guests fishing for some salmon, some fresher coho salmon down at the mouth of Brooks River right now. The big guys up at Brooks Falls still competing for access to fishing spots. 747 dominance over all of these bears this afternoon at Brooks River. It's just a little bit after 3 o'clock local time in Alaska. So there's plenty of opportunity to watch these bears the rest of your afternoon and evening or morning or night, wherever you happen to be around the world. I've enjoyed spending this hour with you this evening. My next live event will be tomorrow in the YouTube comments on Explore.org's Brooks Falls YouTube channel. From 2 to 4 p.m. tomorrow, I'll be joined there by Ranger Brooklyn White from Katmai National Park. We'll be there in the comments just as a Q&A to answer your questions. So please join me there. We'll be back online next week for more play-by-plays and other live events. So check the featured comment. Once I update that, you'll know when and where to tune in. In the meantime, enjoy the bears at Brooks Falls, everybody. My name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. Thanks for joining me this evening, and have a great day.